Hello, and you are back in the Velvet Room with Jokerthefool. This is our 26th episode, and today we'll be discussing the need to see racism everywhere. The IRS is adjusting for inflation, and Marvel can't cast. So we're going to get right into the first topic, and that is racism. A very fun, lighthearted topic, I know. Just kidding. So, again, I do consume some TikTok content. I'm on TikTok, and one of these TikToks that I see that gets into my mind is this young woman who has a list of all the negative pejoratives she calls white people, organized alphabetically. So one, multiple slurs, whatever you want to say for white people. My favorite one personally was Arctic Menace. So if y'all can refer to me as the Arctic Menace from now on, I would very much appreciate that. But this is really indicative of the messed up state of racial relations and the cultural economics of racism. What I mean is that the demand for racism has far exceeded the supply, and this has been the case for a while now, where you've seen people faking hate crimes and exaggerating these sorts of things and doing these sorts of things where basically everything is racist. Another TikTok I saw was this woman saying good morning is racist because if a slave died or they got separated, the masters would say good morning as in like it's like a pun, when if someone says good morning to you, it's just a greeting and they don't mean anything more than that. But if you're obsessed with race, if you're listening to race hustlers, you're buying into this propaganda hook, line, and sinker, then of course you're going to, be sitting and stewing around with this in your all day. You're like, good morning is racist. The Statue of Liberty is racist. This is racist. And if you're constantly thinking about this and that being racist and you're being held back by the evil white man or whatever it is, you're not going to be focusing on self-improvement. You're not going to be focusing on building a better life for you and yours. You're just going to say, hey, it's all Whitey's fault. And I don't have to do anything more than that, then point the finger and blame someone else. And people love doing that. That's a universal thing for humanity, I would say, is that people love to blame someone else. People love to shift the blame onto anybody other than themselves because that feels good and provides this instant gratification. And that's the culture that we live in these days, folks. It's one of instant gratification and seeing racism everywhere and blaming the fact that the system is racist and you're being oppressed is a lot easier than being introspective and saying, well, if my life is shit, it's probably because of me and I need to take active steps to make it not shit, right? And the last, thing I'll talk about with this on this topic is another thing where this was a mainstream thing that I saw, so I'm not sure exactly the truth of this, but the whole thing is that apparently there was a study done. I don't have it on me, so I won't link it. I'm not sure how accurate this is, but the study says that kids who go to majority white colleges, minority kids, right, go to majority white colleges versus majority black colleges have higher rates of depression, i.e., if a minority college student is in a college environment where there is more white people, they're going to be more mentally ill. And if you're living in this culture where you're told, well, white people are the problem, white people are bad and evil, then of course you're going to be more depressed if you're in a college environment where it's mostly white people or majority white people, I should say, because you view these people as your enemy because you've been propagandized to view anyone who isn't your exact skin tone as an enemy, because we live in this race-obsessed society where we have this extreme demand for everything to be racist, for everything to be like the worst days of Jim Crow, the evil, most atrocious days of the slave trade. That has to be your reality. And since it isn't, you're constantly and desperately looking for things to justify it being that, right? And unfortunately, we're in a bit of a better situation than that, but of course, we're heading in the wrong direction, and it's because of the race hustlers and all this propaganda that, well, not forces, but encourages and puts people in the mindset of seeing racism everywhere they look. And that is the unfortunate thing. But we're going to move on to the next topic, and that is the IRS. Now, being an anarcho-capitalist, a libertarian type, I acknowledge and understand that the IRS is the head of the theft department of the government. Taxation is theft by means of extortion, and the Internal Revenue Service is the three-letter organization that manages the theft of in the states. Of course, I'm sure the tax collection offices vary, from country to country, but whatever. I'm talking about the IRS, and the IRS recently, I think this week, announced that the tax brackets for income are being adjusted for inflation. So we live in a progressive tax system in the U.S. where your income is taxed progressively. So for the first $11,600 of your money is taxed at 10%, and then from 11,600 to I think 40, whatever is taxed at 12, and then it goes up to 20, and then 22, and then 37 is the highest tax bracket. So you can make a little bit more money and it'll be taxed less. Now it's about 5 and some percent change. Of course, true inflation is probably higher than that, but it is easing up a little bit on the theft of your income. But all the other sections of the tax code really aren't being adjusted for inflation, so this is how you're being fleeced. Now, of course, this is a system based on theft, so taxation is being theft. They're just optimizing the system where they notice, the handlers notice that people are doing too badly, right? They want you broke and completely dependent on the system, but not to the point where it creates a mass amount of civil unrest. So they're easing up a little bit, just enough to give people maybe a couple 10, 20, however much dollars at the end of the month to be just a little bit less broke, just a little bit less dependent on the system, so they can feel like their head's just slightly above water. Because there's a balancing act that the handlers like to play with the average person, and just how destitute they need to be, just how broke and dependent they need to be on the system. Because if you're too many people are like that, then it creates this mass civil unrest, this societal collapse, and the rich, the people who are up at the top, can't ball out and be super rich all the time, because you need to have a functional society in order to go on private jets and eat at the Ritz and do all these things that rich people absolutely love to do. You need a functional society in order to do those things. So that's why this is happening. So that's my perspective with the IRS adjusting the tax brackets for inflation. It's not to help the average American. It's just to optimize the theft, to make the wage slaves not go into full-on riot revolt mode, and so that way the rich people can keep cashing their checks at the bank, tax-free, by the way, because they've got all those tax loopholes and offshore banking accounts and business funnels to funnel their tax money through, like double Dutch with an Irish sandwich. You can look into it. It's very complicated, very complex, and of course you can only do it if you're operating at these ridiculously high income brackets. But if you're, single mom in the inner city making less than $50,000 a year, you're gonna have to pay taxes. That's just how it is, and that's how it is by design. So with that, we'll move on to the final topic, and this is a comic book related topic, or comic book movie related topic. So Marvel has announced, I believe officially, this could most likely not be, but I saw this on X, I've seen videos about this, is that Pedro Pascal will be playing Reed Richards in Fantastic Four for the MCU. So if you don't know who Reed Richards is, he's Mr. Fantastic. He's the lead of that team. He's like the Captain America of I don't know exactly how to say, but he's like it's like what John Lennon is to the Beatles, right? He's the leader of the Fantastic Four. So Reed Richards is the main person, the Fantastic Four, and Pedro Pascal will be playing him. And it's a very, I would say there is a divide. So there are some people who love Pascal as an actor, are excited for him, but most people are either they don't care or it's a negative thing. And for me, I don't care. Not the biggest fan of Fantastic Four. I watched some of the older movies in the 2000s, and I think, what was it? I'm not sure if it was Scarlett Johansson or Cameron Diaz, whoever it was, whoever played Sue Storm. I was intrigued by that as a kid, right? But other than that, my experience, my knowledge of Fantastic Four and the comics, not really there. I'm not the biggest classic comic book guy. I got into, stuff like Invincible and Comicsgate, not Marvel and DC, so my knowledge base of those characters is very limited. But this whole thing is that, people wanted John Krasinski, however, Jim from The Office, right? They wanted him to be in The Office. That was what the fans wanted. He was in Multiverse of Madness as Reed Richards. Of course, he got dealt the dirty hand in that one, from what I've heard. So it wasn't really the bet. They didn't do, his Reed Richards the justice it should have been done, and establish him as starting to be the Reed Richards for the MCU. That didn't happen. They want to shove Pedro Pascal in there because he's a popular actor. He's in a lot of stuff. And he has this working relationship with Disney already, having been Mando in The Mandalorian, right? Which I watched the first half of season 1 of The Mandalorian, and I liked the way he acted for that. Now, of course, it dropped the ball in that, but there's probably more of the writing. So he's a competent actor, knows what he's doing, but does he necessarily fit the role of being Reed Richards? I would say a lot of people don't think so. And this is the disappointing thing. These are beloved characters. These are characters that the fans are very passionate about. So Marvel really ought to be in a position where they're doing things correctly. They should be on the ball with these casting decisions and doing all these sorts of things, but it's very much an absolute mess. It's an absolute disaster, and it's just blunder after blunder. This is why Marvel's bombed at the box office. This is why Ant-Man Quantumania bombed at the box office. This is why they're scrambling to get the MCU rebooted with Secret Wars, most likely, and why they scrapped Daredevil, why Blade got delayed so many times, because it's a combination of them being completely incompetent, that they don't know what they're doing at this point, and two, if they do know what they're doing, quote unquote, or whatever they are doing is in service of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Put a chicken nerd, make her lame and gay, Panderverse. Exactly, that's the mindset. So it's this extreme incompetence of they don't know what they're doing, and what little they do know what they're doing, that energy of whatever little competency that they have in terms of making films and having a schedule and whatever is being dedicated towards shoving in as many characters and plot lines and whatever that'll up the ESG score of Marvel and Disney. And that is more important than creating faithful adaptations of Marvel comics and doing stuff that the fans of the Marvel comic book canon and lore would actually like, and that would get butts in seats because the fans would be all for it, and that would trickle down to the normie fan base as well. Those who don't know anything about comics and those who engage with it time to time. You're talking about people who go to the local comic store every once in a while, not the ones who are there every Wednesday, with a poll list a mile long, right? And so if you were faithful, if they knew what they were doing with the MCU, or if they just had an MCU that was faithful to the comics, faithful to these characters and the canon that has been established over little decades, then you could be churning out billion-dollar films like they basically were for the heyday of the MCU, between, I would say, the second and the third phases of that franchise. That's where you were at peak MCU, and even then it had its problems, but they were churning out movies that were making like what, $650 to $1 billion consistently, and they could keep doing that if they were making the right decisions. But I would say this casting decision, casting Pedro Pascal as Reed Richards, is indicative that they are making all the wrong decisions with Marvel Studios. And with that, I am going to sign off, and we will go into the outro now. Thank you for being in the Velvet Room with Joker the Fool. Be sure to follow my Substack, velvetroompublishing.substack.com, to read Machine to Man and all my other projects.